The sky burned red. Thick, black clouds rolled over the endless wasteland, flashing with streaks of green lightning. The ground trembled as the first drops of acid rain fell, hissing upon impact. The storm had arrived. In the middle of the barren land, an alien girl lay motionless. Her silver skin was covered in deep wounds, her breathing weak. Her long, dark hair stuck to her face, wet from the poisonous mist that filled the air. She tried to move, but pain shot through her body. She was too weak. She had been left here to die. Far away, in a small metal shelter, a human named Jake Carter watched through his visor. His shelter was built for survival, reinforced steel walls, a decontamination system, and thick glass windows that allowed him to observe the outside world safely. He was not supposed to interfere. But the sight of the alien girl stirred something inside him. She was alone, abandoned, helpless. Jake had seen many things in his years of exploring unknown planets. But this was different. His AI companion, EVA, spoke in her usual calm voice. Survival probability is low. Acid rain levels will increase within minutes. The subject will not last long. Jake frowned. Who is she? EVA processed the data, scanning the girl's biosignature. Unknown species. No recorded matches in our database. Jake's grip tightened on his gear. The smart choice was to do nothing. If she was abandoned, there had to be a reason. Maybe she was dangerous. Maybe she had done something terrible. But she was dying. Outside, the acid rain grew heavier. The girl let out a weak cry, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake could hear it through his suit's audio sensors. His heart pounded. Damn it. Before EVA could stop him, he grabbed his emergency kit, pulled on his reinforced survival suit, and stepped out into the storm. The moment Jake left the shelter, the acidic wind slammed against his suit, making his skin crawl. His visor's display flickered as the system adjusted to the extreme conditions. The ground beneath his boots was soft, almost melting under the toxic rain. He moved fast. The girl's body twitched as he approached. Her violet eyes, filled with fear and pain, barely opened. She tried to speak, but her voice was too weak. "Hey, stay with me," Jake said, kneeling beside her. His suit's protective layer began to burn from the rain, the outer coating peeling away. He had minutes before it would fail completely. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body trembling. He could feel the heat from her wounds. Acid had already burned parts of her skin. His visor flashed red, critical suit integrity dropping. "Not good," he muttered. Behind him, the storm raged louder. The wind howled like a beast, carrying the scent of burning metal and death. The storm was growing stronger. He needed to move. Now. With the alien girl in his arms, Jake ran back toward the shelter. Each step felt heavier as the wind fought against him. His suit's cooling system struggled to keep up, warning alarms flashing across his display. Just a few more meters. The shelter's automated door slid open, recognizing his biosignature. Jake stumbled inside, collapsing to his knees as the door sealed shut behind him. The storm roared outside, slamming against the walls like an angry beast, but inside, there was only silence. Jake gasped for breath, quickly placing the girl onto a medical pad. EVA's system activated, scanning her vitals. "Subject is in critical condition," EVA reported. "Severe acid burns. Internal damage. Unknown biological structure. Healing process uncertain." Jake removed his helmet, running a hand through his damp hair. He had made his choice. He had saved her. But as he looked down at the alien girl, he couldn't help but wonder, who was she? And why had she been left to die? Jake sat on the cold metal floor, his breathing still heavy from the run. The storm outside continued to roar, shaking the walls of the shelter. Acid rain pounded against the reinforced glass, leaving behind steaming streaks as it sizzled. The air inside was sterile, a stark contrast of the burning chaos outside. His eyes moved to the alien girl lying on the medical pad. Her body was fragile, her silver skin marred with deep burns that pulsed faintly with an eerie glow. Every breath she took was shallow, labored, as if each one might be her last. Jake's fingers hovered over the medical interface. His suit's auto-repair system had taken some damage, but it was still operational. EVA had already started running scans on the girl, but the AI's calm voice soon delivered bad news. Her biology does not match any known species. Our medical supplies may not be compatible. Administering treatment is highly risky. Jake exhaled sharply. She won't survive if we do nothing. EVA remained silent for a moment before responding. That is correct. He reached into his emergency medkit and pulled out a vial of nanoserum. It was designed for humans, programmed to accelerate healing and repair minor injuries. He didn't know if it would work on her or if it would make things worse. He had two options: take the risk or watch her die. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed a sterilized injector, filled it with a minimal dose, and pressed it against the girl's shoulder. The serum hissed as it entered her bloodstream. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, her body convulsed. Jake's heart jumped as the girl's silver skin flashed with light, the deep wounds along her arms shifting, closing, reshaping before his eyes. Her fingers curled, her breathing hitched, and then she stilled. He waited. 1 second. 2. Her chest rose and fell in a steadier rhythm. It was working. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He hadn't killed her. At least, not yet. Outside, the storm started to slow. The worst had passed, leaving behind the eerie silence that always followed. But Jake knew the real problems were only beginning. Why had she been abandoned? Who had left her to die? And most importantly, would they come back to finish the job? A soft groan pulled his attention back. The girl's eyelids fluttered open. Her irises were a deep shade of violet, glowing faintly under the dim lights. Her gaze met his, and for a brief second, there was nothing. Just confusion, exhaustion. Then fear. She flinched, weakly trying to push herself away. Her hands barely moved, but her eyes darted around the room, scanning for an escape. Jake said, raising his hands in a calming gesture. You're safe. She didn't understand. He could tell by the way her brows furrowed, her breathing uneven. She was on edge, like a trapped animal, expecting another attack. Jake turned to EVA. Can you translate? Processing linguistic patterns. Estimated time. 1 hour. Not helpful. The girl's fingers curled against the medical pad, her body trembling. Jake recognized the look in her eyes. She thought she was still in danger. He needed to gain her trust. Fast. Moving slowly, he pulled a water flask from his belt and held it out. Here. You need this. She hesitated. Her eyes flicked between him and the flask. Then, with slow, shaky movements, she reached out. Her fingers brushed against the metal before she pulled back, as if expecting pain. Jake frowned. Had she been hurt before? He placed the flask beside her and sat back, giving her space. After a long pause, she finally picked it up. She sniffed the opening first, instinct, survival, before taking a small sip. The tension in her shoulders relaxed slightly. Progress. Jake leaned against the wall, watching as she cautiously drank. She was still afraid, but no longer panicking. That was a start. Then, without warning, she spoke. Her voice was weak, hoarse, but the words were clear. They will come back. Jake froze. A chill ran down his spine as he realized the truth. Whoever had left her to die wasn't finished yet. The weight of her words settled in the air like a thick fog. They will come back. Jake's pulse quickened. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed by the alien girl herself sent a chill down his spine. His instincts screamed at him to prepare, to fortify the shelter, to find out who was after her and why. The girl's breathing was still uneven, but her violet eyes locked onto his with an intensity that told him she wasn't just afraid, she was warning him. Jake took a steady breath. Who's coming back? Her fingers tightened around the water flask as she struggled to form the words. Hunters. That single word sent alarm bells ringing in Jake's mind. This wasn't just some accident, some unfortunate soul left behind in a storm. She had been hunted. And if the people responsible were still looking for her, then that meant they knew she was still alive. Jake pushed himself to his feet, moving toward the control panel on the far wall. His fingers flew over the holographic display, pulling up external scans. The storm had passed, but the sensors were still struggling to adjust after the intense acid rainfall. The terrain outside was silent, but silence could be deceptive. The girl coughed weakly, trying to sit up. Jake turned, watching as she winced, her body still recovering from whatever injury she had endured before he found her. She was clearly in pain, but she was fighting to stay alert. "Easy," Jake said, stepping toward her. "You're still healing." Her eyes flicked up to meet his, filled with quiet determination. "We must leave." Jake hesitated. He knew she was right. If hunters were after her, this outpost wouldn't hold for long. It was a temporary research station, not a fortress. If a skilled enemy wanted in, they would find a way. But running without a plan, that was just as dangerous. Jake ran a hand through his short-cropped hair, exhaling sharply. "We can't just walk out there. That storm just ended. The ground's unstable, and the air's still toxic in some areas." The girl's grip on the medical pad tightened. They will not wait. She was right again. Whoever had left her to die had expected her to be dead by now. If they came back and found the body missing, they'd know someone had interfered. And if they were thorough enough to track her, then they were already on their way. A sharp beep from the control panel confirmed his worst fears. Jake spun back to the display. The external sensors had finally stabilized, and what they showed made his blood run cold. Movement. Not just one signal. Multiple. "Damn it," Jake muttered under his breath. The girl had been right about everything. The hunters were already closing in. She struggled to sit up, gripping the side of the medical pad for support. "Weapons?" Jake shook his head. "Not enough. This place was built for research, not combat." He glanced around the room, scanning for anything that could be useful. He had a few standard-issue pulse rounds for his sidearm, a plasma cutter for emergency repairs, and a couple of stun charges. Not nearly enough for a real fight. His mind raced. They needed a way out. Then an idea hit him. It was risky. Very risky. But at this point, risk was all they had. Jake turned back to the girl. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though the movement was strained. She was weak, but determined. He didn't have time to argue. They had to move. Jake reached under the medical pad, pulling out a small duffel bag. He stuffed in supplies. Rations, medkits, spare power cells, anything they could carry. Then he turned back to the girl. "I don't know who you are, and I don't know why they're after you. But if we're getting out of here alive, I need to know one thing." He locked eyes with her. "What are we up against?" The girl's expression darkened. Her violet eyes flashed with something Jake couldn't quite place. Fear, anger, or maybe something worse. She exhaled, then spoke. "They are not human." Jake's stomach twisted. He had been prepared for mercenaries, rogue soldiers, bounty hunters. But this was something else entirely. A sudden tremor shook the ground beneath them. A second later, a deep, inhuman screech echoed from outside. The hunters had arrived. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the eerie, bone-chilling screech echoed through the thin walls of the research outpost. Jake's muscles tensed as he exchanged a quick glance with the alien girl. Her violet eyes darkened with recognition and fear. "They're here," she whispered. Jake didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed the duffel bag, slinging it over his shoulder, while his other hand hovered near the pistol strapped to his hip. He knew a standard-issue firearm wouldn't be enough against an unknown enemy, but something was better than nothing. The control panel flickered with motion alerts, blurry figures moving just beyond the perimeter. They weren't using conventional stealth tactics. They didn't have to. They wanted to be seen. A metallic scraping sound echoed from the main entrance. Then another. Jake's mind raced. The outpost wasn't built for combat. It was a temporary research station, not a fortress. The walls were strong enough to withstand acid storms, but against unknown hunters with unknown weapons. That was a different story. He turned to the girl. "You need to tell me what we're dealing with now." She swallowed hard, pressing a hand against her side as she struggled to steady herself. They are called the Cyrath." Jake frowned. "Never heard of them." "You wouldn't have," she said, her voice strained but urgent. "They are not from this system. They hunt for sport, for pleasure, and once they mark a target, they do not stop." Jake exhaled sharply. "Great, so they're alien bounty hunters." "No." Her voice dropped lower. "Worse." The scraping sound returned, closer this time. A slow, deliberate sound, like claws dragging against the reinforced metal door. The air inside the outpost grew heavy, almost suffocating. Jake's grip tightened on his pistol. "Weapons, how do we stop them?" The girl hesitated, then shook her head. "You don't." The words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. He had fought against odds before, but this, a fight he couldn't win. The screen flickered again. One of the figures had stepped into full view. Jake felt his stomach tighten. The creature stood nearly 7 feet tall, its elongated limbs covered in what looked like a mix of organic armor and metallic plating. Its head was smooth, featureless except for the 2 slits where eyes should have been. Except they weren't eyes. They were glowing embers, flickering like dying stars. It tilted its head slightly, as if listening. Then, in a single, unnatural motion, it placed one clawed hand on the door. The metal hissed on contact. Jake barely had time to react before the girl grabbed his wrist. "We have to go," she urged. Jake clenched his jaw. Running blind was a death sentence. He needed a plan, an escape route. Then he remembered. The underground tunnels. Most research outposts had emergency escape routes leading to a secondary location in case of containment breaches. If they could make it to the tunnels, they might have a chance to escape undetected. Jake reached for his wrist console, swiping through the outpost's schematics. There, a maintenance hatch at the back of the facility. It led to a tunnel system beneath the terrain, originally designed for environmental studies. It wasn't much, but it was their best shot. "This way," he said, grabbing the girl's arm and pulling her toward the corridor. The walls groaned as the metal door behind them began to melt. A deep guttural growl filled the air, sending a shiver down Jake's spine. He pushed forward, half dragging the weakened alien girl as he sprinted toward the maintenance hatch. Every second counted. He reached the panel, his fingers flying over the manual override. A loud clank sounded as the hatch unlocked, revealing a narrow ladder leading downward. Jake didn't hesitate. "Go. Now." The girl climbed down first, moving slower than he would have liked. He gritted his teeth, glancing back just in time to see the entrance door give way. A massive, clawed foot stepped inside. Jake didn't wait to see more. He followed the girl down the ladder, sealing the hatch behind them, just as a deafening roar filled the air above. Darkness swallowed them whole. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the girl's voice broke through the blackness. "They will not stop hunting us." Jake exhaled, adjusting his grip on the pistol. "Then we make them regret it." The tunnel walls pulsed with a faint bioluminescent glow, casting eerie shadows as Jake led the way through the narrow passage. The air was damp, thick with the scent of minerals, and something else, something metallic, almost like blood. Behind him, the alien girl stumbled slightly, her breath ragged. She was still weak, but she pushed forward, determination burning in her violet eyes. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They will follow the scent." Jake tightened his grip on his pistol. "Then we need to stay ahead of them." The tunnels were old, remnants of a long-abandoned research project. Some parts had collapsed over time, but Jake's wrist console showed an exit nearly half a mile ahead. If they could reach it, they might have a chance to lose the Cyrith in the storm outside. But just as he turned a corner, the ground beneath his feet shifted. The moment of weightlessness was terrifying. Then suddenly, he was falling. A sharp jolt of pain shot through his body as he hit the ground. Dust filled the air, choking his lungs. Somewhere above, he heard the alien girl call his name, panic lacing her voice. "I'm okay," he coughed, pushing himself to his feet. Then he realized he wasn't alone. The chamber he had fallen into wasn't just a cavern. It was a graveyard. Bones, dozens of them. Twisted, shattered remains of creatures he didn't recognize, their skeletal frames frozen in silent agony. Some were humanoid, others entirely alien, their bodies contorted in ways that suggested a violent end. Jake swallowed hard. This wasn't just some random pit. This was where the Cyrith fed. A low growl echoed from the shadows. Jake turned slowly, his heart hammering. Something moved beyond the edge of the faint bioluminescence. A shape. Tall. Hulking. Watching. His fingers tightened around his pistol. The creature stepped forward. Its body was even more terrifying up close. Thick armor-like skin, glistening in the dim light, its claws sharp enough to carve through solid rock. Its ember-like eyes flickered, locked onto Jake with a predatory hunger. Jake didn't wait for an introduction. He fired. The shot rang through the chamber, the bullet striking the creature's shoulder. Sparks flew as the round barely scratched its thick hide. The creature let out a guttural snarl. Then it charged. Jake barely had time to react before he threw himself sideways, rolling across the bones as the beast's massive claws slammed into the ground where he had just stood. It was fast. Too fast. Jake scrambled backward, searching for anything. A weapon. An escape. A miracle. Then he saw it. One of the skeletons had something clutched in its bony fingers. A weapon. A tool. A chance. Jake lunged, grabbing the object just as the creature swiped again, its claws missing him by inches. The moment his fingers wrapped around the cold metal, something clicked. The weapon hummed to life. A blade of pure energy extended from the hilt, crackling with an unnatural force. Jake didn't think, he reacted. As the creature lunged again, he swung. The blade sliced clean through the monster's arm. A deafening roar filled the cavern, the beast staggering backward in shock and agony. Jake didn't waste the opportunity. He sprinted toward the chamber's edge, looking up to where the alien girl leaned over the hole. "Jump," she shouted. Jake didn't hesitate. He took a running start and leaped, just as the creature lunged for him again. For a split second, he felt nothing but air beneath him. Then, impact. The alien girl grabbed his arm, pulling him up with a strength that didn't match her frail appearance. The creature let out one final furious roar as the ground beneath it collapsed. Then it was gone. Jake lay on the cold tunnel floor, breathing hard, staring at the weapon still glowing in his hand. "That was close," he muttered. The girl looked at the blade, her eyes widening. "That weapon, it was made to kill them." Jake sat up. "Then I guess we're not running anymore." She nodded, a new fire in her gaze. "Then let's finish this." The tunnel stretched endlessly before them, its walls humming with a faint energy that made Jake's skin prickle. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of minerals, and something ancient, something that didn't belong. Beside him, the alien girl, Lyrian, moved with silent determination. Her violet eyes darted around, scanning every shadow, every crack in the stone. She was nervous. Jake tightened his grip on the energy blade, still clutched in his hand. After what they had just faced, he wasn't taking any chances. "Where does this lead?" he asked. Lyrian hesitated. Somewhere we were never meant to go. That wasn't exactly comforting. The deeper they ventured, the stronger the unnatural energy became. It vibrated beneath their feet, thrummed against their bones. Something was waiting ahead. Then, without warning, the tunnel ended. A vast cavern opened before them, so massive that Jake couldn't see the other side. The ceiling was lost in darkness, but below, at the very heart of the chamber, was something that made his breath catch. A structure. Not rock. Not natural. A machine. It pulsed with a dark blue light, almost like it was breathing. Strange symbols glowed across its surface, shifting, rearranging themselves like they were alive. Lyrian took a sharp step back. No, this is wrong. Jake glanced at her. What is it? Her hands trembled. This place. This machine. It's what the Sireth were searching for. Jake's pulse quickened. Then we need to destroy it. Lyrian shook her head. You don't understand. It's already awake. A deep rumble filled the chamber. The pulsing light of the machine intensified, casting flickering shadows against the cavern walls. The ground beneath them vibrated. Then, they heard it. A voice. Not words, not in any language Jake recognized, but it spoke all the same, directly into his mind, bypassing sound entirely. You have come too far. Jake clenched his jaw. Yeah, well, we're not leaving. The machine answered. No, you are not. The cavern shook. The rock beneath their feet cracked as something emerged from the darkness. Massive, towering. Not flesh and bone, but metal and energy. A guardian. It had been waiting, watching, and now it had decided. Jake barely had time to move before the thing attacked. A beam of pure energy ripped through the air, missing him by inches. The heat singed his skin, even through his armor. Lyrian darted to the side, her body moving with impossible speed. We can't fight this. Jake gritted his teeth. Then what's the plan? She pointed at the machine. If we destroy the core, the Guardian will fall. Easier said than done. The machine was at the center of the cavern, surrounded by an abyss so deep that Jake couldn't see the bottom. The only way across was a thin, crumbling bridge, and the Guardian stood directly in their path. Another blast of energy shattered the ground beside them. Jake didn't wait for a second shot. He grabbed Lyrian's hand and ran. The Guardian moved fast, too fast for something its size. It closed the distance in seconds, its massive claws slicing through stone like paper. The bridge was right there. Jake pushed forward, forcing his legs to move faster, ignoring the burning pain in his chest. The machine's pulsing light grew brighter. The Guardian roared. They were out of time. Lyrian suddenly stopped. What the hell are you doing? Jake shouted. She turned to face the Guardian, her eyes glowing with an intensity he had never seen before. Go, she whispered. Jake's stomach dropped. No, you're not. She pressed something into his hand. A small crystal. Warm. Alive. Pulsing with energy. You have to finish this, she said, before it's too late. Jake shook his head. I'm not leaving you. Lyrian smiled. A sad, knowing smile. Then she turned to face the Guardian, and she ran straight at it. Jake's breath caught. No. The Guardian lunged. Lyrian leaped, and for a brief moment, just a heartbeat, she became light. Her entire body ignited with an otherworldly glow, radiating pure energy. The cavern filled with a blinding white light as her form collided with the Guardian. Then, silence. The machine's glow flickered. Jake didn't have time to think. He gripped the crystal, turned, and sprinted across the bridge. Behind him, the Guardian let out a final, earth-shaking scream, then collapsed. Jake reached the core, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He didn't know what the crystal would do. He didn't care. With every ounce of strength he had left, he slammed it into the machine's core. The reaction was instant. The cavern exploded with energy. The walls trembled. The machine let out an ear-piercing wail as its glow died. And then everything fell apart. Jake felt the floor give way beneath him. The last thing he saw was the light fading from the machine, and the memory of Lyrian's smile. Darkness. Cold. Jake wasn't sure how long he had been unconscious. His body felt weightless, drifting in an abyss that stretched into nothingness. He struggled to open his eyes, but his limbs wouldn't move. Then, a spark. A flicker of light in the void. Warmth spread through his body, slow at first, then rushing like a tidal wave. His fingers twitched. His lungs ached for air. With a sharp gasp, Jake's eyes flew open. He was floating. Or falling. It was impossible to tell. Above him, a swirling mass of energy pulsed with dying light. The machine. The core. It was collapsing, the power within it spiraling out of control. A voice whispered in his mind, "You were not meant to interfere." Jake gritted his teeth. Too late for that. His body jolted as gravity returned. He was plummeting. The cavern walls rushed past him, glowing cracks spreading through the rock like veins of molten fire. The machine's destruction was pulling everything into its void. He twisted midair, reaching for anything, to break his fall. Then, a hand. Small, delicate, glowing. Lyrian. She gripped his wrist with impossible strength, her violet eyes blazing with energy. She was alive. Jake barely had time to react before she pulled him into her arms and launched upward. The world blurred. Flashes of light. Shattered rock. The collapsing remains of a civilization lost to time. They broke through. One final burst of speed. And suddenly, silence. Jake hit the ground hard, coughing as dust and debris rained down around him. His lungs burned, but he was alive. And so was she. Lyrian stood a few feet away, her form shimmering, her breath ragged. Jake pushed himself up, eyes wide. "You? How?" She smiled weakly. "I wasn't going to let you die alone." A deep tremor shook the ground beneath them. They were still inside the underground ruins, but the core's destruction had weakened everything. Cracks spread across the walls, the ceiling above them groaning, ready to collapse. "We need to move," Lyrian said, reaching for him. Jake didn't hesitate. He took her hand, and together, they ran. The passage ahead was barely stable, chunks of stone crashing down as the structure gave way. Each step felt like a battle against time. The exit was still too far. Then, light. A small opening ahead. A sliver of sky. Freedom. But just as they reached it, the ground beneath Lyrian vanished. She let out a startled cry as she plunged downward. Jake's instincts kicked in. He lunged, grabbing her wrist just in time. She dangled over the edge of a bottomless pit, eyes wide with shock. "Hold on," Jake yelled, straining to pull her up. The ruins shuddered. The sky above them was so close, but the ground beneath him was unstable. He could feel the stone cracking. "I'm slipping," Lyrian whispered. "No, you're not." She met his gaze. Something unspoken passed between them. Then, she let go. Jake's heart stopped. No. But before she could fall, she changed. Light exploded from her body, enveloping her in a swirling aura of pure energy. Her form shifted, twisting into something ethereal, something not entirely of this world. She floated. Jake watched in stunned silence as she hovered above the abyss, her body radiant with a power he didn't understand. Then, slowly, she rose. Her hand touched his cheek. Warm, real. "I remember now," she murmured. Jake swallowed hard. "Remember what?" Lyrian's gaze drifted upward. "Who I am." A final tremor shook the ruins. The opening above them widened. Lyrian extended her hand, and in a heartbeat, they were rising. Not climbing. Not running. Just ascending. The ruins fell away beneath them. The wreckage of the ancient machine, the Guardian, the lost civilization, gone. And then, sky. Jake sucked in a breath as they emerged into the open air. The storm had cleared. The acrid rain was gone. The land below them stretched for miles, illuminated by the golden glow of a rising sun. They landed gently on a rocky ledge, the wind rushing past them. Jake turned to Lyrian. She stood taller now, her eyes still glowing, her energy still shifting like a cosmic fire. What happened to you? She exhaled slowly. I was never just an outcast, never just a refugee. Jake's mind raced. Then what are you? Lyrian smiled, a knowing, almost ancient smile. And then, behind her, the sky opened. A brilliant rift tore through the fabric of the horizon. Not violent, not destructive, just waiting. Jake's chest tightened. Lyrian. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. I can go home now. Silence stretched between them. Jake wanted to speak, wanted to tell her everything. But what could he say? What could he do? Lyrian took his hand one last time, her touch lingering. You saved me, she whispered. In more ways than you know. And then, she stepped into the light. Jake shielded his eyes as the rift folded in on itself. And just like that, she was gone. The wind howled across the cliffside. The world felt empty. Jake clenched his fists, staring at the spot where she had stood. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, with a deep breath, he turned away. The battle was over. The war was not, and he had work to do.